Okay, Kevin, do we have you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. I can hear you super well. So I'm going to quickly just give everyone your background bio, and I'm going to get your presentation up on the screen and have you give your presentation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Excellent.
Excellent. So Kevin Jackson is a senior relationship manager with LRG Wealth Advisors and Hightower in New York. With more than a decade of experience in financial services, Kevin focuses on the development and implementation of wealth management strategies for individuals, families, and small businesses. His main objective is to thoroughly understand his clients' financial priorities and future goals, as well as addressing potential concerns. He served as a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch Bank of America prior to moving to Hightower. He's a native of Boston, Massachusetts, where he earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree from Boston College in the fields of political science and communications. He's a certified financial planner, and he currently resides in Westchester County, New York, with his wife and 2 children. All right, Kevin, thank you so much, and let me get your presentation up while you get started.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and hello, everybody. Financial literacy is extremely important, but what's more important is the ability to broadcast without technical difficulties. So I think, thank the team for being so patient, and I had my own challenges and just happy to have everything up and going well. But I'll jump right into the presentation. So around financial literacy, the most important thing is just being a good steward of your finances. I know between all of us, we always wish we could save more. At your job, you wish you could earn more, but it's really about how do you build the fundamentals with your current situation, set the proper goals around that, and really find out how you can let your money work for you in amazing ways if you're able to take some simple steps when it comes to really budgeting, setting those goals, and ultimately around debt management. So those are the keys and the fundamentals to really building wealth as it comes to, regardless of your income. If you don't know how to save, you're not going to get ahead. The interesting thing is, as you continue to earn more, if you don't have the proper foundation to begin, it seems that the more money you make, the faster you're able to spend it. But it doesn't go directly into your bank account. You don't see it pay dividends in the long run. So as I go through the presentation, I'll go through some of these important topics, and it's a way to set a foundation for yourself, but also a way for you to start to educate those around you with your family to make sure that they are putting money aside, planning for different phases within their lives, and ultimately paying it forward, because if we continue to help each other, that's how we ultimately get ahead. And that's not just here in the U.S., that's around the world. It takes community to really help in that degree. Where the slide is up, it looks like. Okay, perfect. Can I have you go to the next slide? So the 3 keys we talk about: money management is creating and sticking to a budget, setting savings goals, and tackling debt. So how do you create a budget? When it comes down to a budget, you're trying to find out, okay, what are your inflows as to what money you're making, but also what are the outflows? What's the amount of money in the bills that you have to pay? And when it comes down to what you have to pay, there are the different bills that you cannot afford to mess up, where if you're paying rent, you're paying your mortgage, you want to keep the roof over your head. That typically starts, and then you come down the list from there. So you always want to start with your most important bills and start to set your budget to find out exactly what needs to be paid. Can we go to the next slide, and I can actually take you through an exercise that talks about it a little more. So here we have Joe's monthly budget. So with his income, salary is $2,000, and listed some of the key expenses we just talked about. So you have rent, you have your groceries, you have your utilities, you have the commute to and from your job, and you have miscellaneous expenses, and that's anything from personal care, shopping, eating out, you name it. And once that's done, you say, okay, now I have $2,000 to start, but once we start to add up all of the different expenses, what am I left with? So after he's paid just his expenses, he has $250 left over. So what he does, he takes $100 and puts it towards savings, as well, because the most important thing we talk about budgeting is you want to include yourself in your expenses. It's always important that you pay yourself. So with $100 in the savings, that's of his income of $2,000, that's 5%. So putting away 5% and left over, he has $150. So as you're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with the rest of this money here? You say, okay, you have to figure out what your wants are versus your needs. And the biggest thing that we all have to do is take a look in the mirror and be realistic with ourselves. So there's some things that we really want, but ultimately it's what do we need? And you start basic. You say, okay, I want to make sure a roof's over my head. I want to make sure if you have a family that your family's taken care of to a certain degree. And especially for the parents out there or those that are in a house with children, you want them to get everything that you want to give them everything. You want to give them the world. However, in budgeting, it's always important that you have tangible things set aside so that you don't go over budget, because a lot of times when that happens, you start to take on different debt. So when you're being realistic, you want to be detailed as you're listing that out. So what do the essential needs for your house look like? And then when we talk about building goals, you will say, okay, what are the things that I want? And as you start to put those two together in the different columns, you start to paint a clearer picture of what your finances could be. And the biggest thing is sticking to the budget. So you have to have self-control. And as we talk about trial and error, this is not something that you put it down on paper and when you go up to and you decide to execute if you're not doing it already, it goes off flawlessly. In life, you always have different things that creep up. And the biggest thing is, as you're going through and you have a controlled budget, is you have to take a step back and look at, okay, what are the things that I listed and are they realistic? Have I set realistic goals so that I can really make sure that I'm able to stick with this program? Sometimes a realistic goal is a little far-fetched in talking about how much we're going to go beyond. So here he has $150 left over. If he says, I want to take that $150 and I want to turn it into $100,000 in a year, odds are it's not being realistic with himself. So it is about making sure that you have realistic version, but as you talk about, you do different revisions within your budget. Sometimes you may have set goals too high, or actually sometimes you may have set them too low, and you find out that you have a little bit more wiggle room. And the biggest thing is when we talk about planning is you have to put things aside. And as you put them into the different buckets, you say, okay, you look at debt. Okay, here I want to pay down my student loans. I want to be debt-free, and then you put a year on it. It's 2016. If you say I want to be debt-free by 2017, and the amount of debt that you have is way beyond what your actual income can support, unless you have a rich relative that is happy to help you, or you win the lottery, odds are you need to revise that goal, but actually find something that's more realistic to what makes sense for you. Can we go to the next slide? So when we talk about setting goals, you have your short-term versus your long-term goals. So short-term goals, you're thinking immediate. So that's anything in the 0 to 6 months. So when you're looking at those things, you say, okay, for your job or maybe even for school, you say, okay, I need a new computer. I might need to have a phone. And how am I going to put the money aside for this goal? And you find out what the amount is. And then it's, okay, over the next few months, how am I able to put money aside so that I can build up to that one goal? Then you have your medium-term goals, which it's still not too far out, but it's not as, you won't have access to the funds as quickly. So you know you have to plan out anywhere from 6 months to a year to figure out how you're going to get there. And that might be something where you decide you want to take a nice vacation. I know with the Dragon Boats, I wouldn't mind taking a nice vacation to Trinidad, somewhere around February, where there is this illustrious carnival of sorts, and people are very festive. But anybody that's gone there that is not a native of Trinidad knows that it is quite expensive to travel during that time of year. If you decide that you want to play mass, that's a whole nother undertaking when you talk about putting money to the side. So that might be something where a year out, you decide, here's how I'm going to start to budget for it, and I know exactly what I need to put aside each and every month. And another thing is you talk about You might want to look at a car. You might want to invest, saving for school. Those are other things that you can put on the list. And then you come down to the long-term goals. So with long-term goals, typically you're looking at a year or more. And these are the goals where they're bigger. Obviously, we talk about being debt-free, potentially buying a home, even as you start about talking about starting a family. Again, for the parents on the line or those in the house with kids are expensive. And you don't always plan to have kids in the time that you want, but the one thing you'll find out very quickly, once you have them, you do need to have a plan in place. The name of the game sometimes with children is hang on and try to survive, and that works for a certain amount of time, but you really want to start to sit down and figure out how you can put things in place so that it's not as much chaos. And the biggest thing, and so continuing with the long-term goals, it's something where you just want to continue to save. You want to be liquid to a certain extent. So when I look at savings, you have different ways where you have different buckets. You have the liquid bucket where you might put it into a checking or savings account, and talking about the growth in those accounts, you're not going to get much from it. However, in the instance that you need to get to the money quickly, it's there. You don't have to jump through any hoops. You can literally write a check, use the debit card, go to the bank and withdraw the cash without an issue. And then when you have money that you're able to put where you don't need it as readily available, you have different options to you where you have CDs, you have high yield savings bonds, where you can lock away the cash for a little longer and you can get some extra growth out of it. Now, if you haven't heard, Albert Einstein put it best where he said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And what does that mean? So let's say if you had $1,000 in the bank. You have $1,000, doesn't matter if it's in a CD, let's say it's in a savings bond. But you start off with $1,000 and you leave it. You actually do not touch it. At the end of the year, you get interest on top of that $1,000. So whether it's 5%, whether it's 1%, 2%, you've gotten something extra on top of that. And you leave it again. Now another year passes, and now you've earned interest on the $1,000 plus the interest. You leave it. Another year comes around. Now you have interest on the $1,000 plus the interest from the initial year plus interest from the second year. Now you're in the third year, so you're getting interest on that. That's what compound interest is. So it continually grows at a multiplier of your money so that you can see the results of your savings. And obviously, the higher the interest rate that you're getting, the better that you'll do, especially if you talk about over the long run. If you're only dealing with a year to 2 years, the compound interest, you won't see it. However, if you're able, especially at a young age, to start to put money aside and let compound interest build up over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you'd be amazed at what that multiple can look like, even if it's with a smaller amount of money. So that's why the biggest thing, if you're able to save, as you start to budget, is start to put money aside for the savings and start to knock off these different buckets. The most essential thing is you want to make sure that your short-term cash is available. So as you're doing your budget, you know what your essential expenses are for the month. And once you're able to put that down, the things that you have to pay, and you need to make sure that you pay in an instance where you lose your ability to produce income, you're having issues with the business, whatever it may be, you want to have that bucket taken care of where you put that in your emergency reserve. Once you go beyond that, that's the money that you're trying to put there and let it compound as the years go forward. Can we go to the next slide? So now we're starting to get into debt. And I apologize, I wanted to say one more thing with the last slide, where I was starting to get into as we talk about investments. So you have the emergency reserve, but then as we talk about the money that you're putting into other vehicles, it's important where you look at retirement or you look at your long-term savings. They somewhat go hand in hand. It's just a matter of what you put your hard-earned money towards. So here in the United States, and as you have different places around the world, there are different tax-deferred vehicles that you can put money in that are earmarked for retirement. So you have an IRA. If your job has some type of retirement plan, you want to make sure you find out what the benefits are with your job and what you're able to put to the side. Because when you're putting money there, it's money out of your paycheck, but when it comes out of your paycheck, especially with your job, it's right out of your income pre-tax. So it doesn't hurt as much when you see it go, and it's something where it's able to grow out of sight, out of mind, where the bite isn't as bad before the taxes get taken out. You really feel it on that end. But it's important if you find out there's a pre-tax option for you to see what your job offers, and sometimes there's a match associated with it. So my advice is always, when your job is willing to give you money for participating, why would you leave free money on the table when it's at your benefit? Where, say, if you put aside 4% of your weekly or monthly check, and your job says, you know what, if you do that, we'll match you 4% of your salary. Let's do that for the next 15, 20, 30 years. You'd be amazed to see what you're able to get with somebody else helping you. So now instead of 4%, you're getting 8% that's put towards your savings, where it doubles. So again, that's another option that you want to look at once you're able to figure out what your initial budget is, and then once you go beyond that to the next level. Okay, can we go to the next slide? All right, now debt is a big thing, and across the world you always have what's good debt, what's bad debt. And even the most successful people are in debt. It's just a matter of how you're able to maintain and manage that debt so that it doesn't hinder you in achieving your financial goals. So when you look at good debt, what's an idea of good debt? You have student loans, mortgages, auto loans, emergency credit cards, and even you could say personal loans to a degree. So why is that good? Self-explanatory. When you have student debt, that's because you've gone to an institution of higher learning to advance yourself in some area. As we just mentioned, in STEM careers, if you're focused on a specific area and you have that technical side, your earning potential is multiplied year over year, depending on what you focus on when you're in school and then the job field that you get into. But you'll also find that people go into school, and you have myself, for example. I was a political science communications major, and somehow I ended up in finance. Why is that? When I went to school, I went to an idea that I was going to be a lawyer. And when I came out of school, I realized there were a lot of things that I wanted to do to help people, but I didn't need to do it necessarily through the law, and I always wanted to do business. And that's how I got into the financial advising field, where you're able to truly get down and find out what people look like. The more information they give you, you're able to dissect that information and really help them put tangible steps in place so that they can get towards their goals. So with the student loans, it's important where you take yourself and you add to your earning potential. But depending on where you go to school, that mountain of debt could be quite sizable. Especially here in the United States, I found out that my alma mater is, it started off at, let's say, $30,000, and now it's doubled and then some to go to school for 1 year of education. And to be honest, when you get out, you're not guaranteed a job. So sometimes when you're looking at schools, you have to take into account what type of debt you would leave with, where not everybody has money set aside for education or didn't have their parents put money aside for them. So it's something that you have to take on, and you want to be smart about it. Okay? So with good debt, it's essentially investing in yourself. That sounds like the simplest way to put it is you're investing in yourself. Now, what's bad debt? It's any debt that you purchase without a plan to repay it. Example, credit card is the easiest thing to think about. When you have even your emergency credit card, people say, oh, I don't use credit cards, but I have an emergency credit card just in case. The question is, what do you count as an emergency? And sometimes we feel, oh, I wish I had thought to go get an outfit to go to a certain event. I don't have it in my savings account, but I have the credit card. This is an emergency. That does not count as an emergency. And you find out if you don't have a list written out and really start to figure out, is this a want versus a need? You can start to accumulate a lot of bad debt based off of your emotions and not really looking at the plan that you have in place to figure out, if I do take on this debt, how long will it take me to pay it off? And am I able to put this debt off until I'm able to save for it and make, instead of putting it on your credit card, maybe you make it one of your short-term goals to save for, as opposed to, I don't need it this month. Maybe if I'm able to put something off for 3 months, now I have a plan in place. And you're ultimately able to negotiate a little better sometimes as well, if you have the cash as opposed to coming in and putting and using a line of credit. And from there, what you'll find is with bad debt, it continues to build, and something that started off really small, depending on what the price of repaying it is, especially with a payday loan, where they give you a certain amount of time. If you go beyond it, the interest rates are astronomical. You end up paying almost half, if not more, of what you initially took out. And so, again, that's not necessarily investing in yourself. That's something more emotion as opposed to having a plan in place. Can we move to the next slide? So this is just an illustration where you talk about interest rates. So just looking at the difference between fixed and adjustable interest rates. So you have your car, student loans, credit cards, and checking and savings accounts. And so with the car, typically you'll find that you have a fixed rate. And the interest rate, depending on your credit, can be anywhere from, let's say, 1.5% up to as high as maybe 8%. With student loans, same thing. It's something where instead of being a fixed rate, this is typically a variable rate, where what does that mean? The rate can adjust. So 1 year you might be paying 4 or 5%, and depending on what's happening with the economy, you might find or get a notice that your interest rate is rising. And so now instead of 4 or 5%, you might be paying 6%. And it may not seem like a large jump, but when you talk about compounding interest and the debt growing, the higher the interest, the longer it's going to take you to pay it off. Especially if you don't have a plan in place. A lot of times when you're paying down debt, especially if it's bad debt, sometimes you want to be a little more aggressive in paying it down because the interest rates are typically higher as well. And then we get to credit cards once again, where you have credit card anywhere from, you'd say, maybe in the low 7-8% to the high end where it can be as high as 25 to 30%. The average that you'll find is right around 15-16% for credit cards, but that also is something where it can adjust. And in the language that they put with credit card companies, a lot of times, if you have an incident where you miss a payment or two, just because you may have been traveling, you may have forgot, whatever the case is, they have a chance where sometimes they can actually raise the interest rate 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, which if you do have a decent amount of debt on there, you'll notice that it takes you much longer to pay it back. And then the last bit of adjustable interest comes from checking and savings accounts. So you don't typically find much that you're able to do there, but as it says, not all interest rates are created equal. So you want to be aware of what you're doing and how you're taking on debt to that degree. Okay, can we go to the next slide? And so common events that you want to plan for, talk about getting married. Those that have been married or are getting married, it can be quite expensive. And for those that are popular, if you have a large family and on both sides between the families, that number can grow very quickly too. And if you have parents that love everybody, all of a sudden you notice that people weren't on your list have appeared on your list because they've had the privilege of being your parents and letting that person know that they're invited. So it's important that you start to budget, and especially when you talk about a wedding, that you bring your parents into it so that they understand what the budget is, because sometimes they're so excited, they don't realize what the budget can increase to. Buying a home, children, saving for college, starting a business, all these things are extremely important, and you want to flesh out how you're going to really be successful in achieving your financial success here. So these are the tangible steps where you need to find out how much time do I need before I can have a down payment for a home. What does a home cost, and what can I afford, or what can we afford based on our budget? So these are all important things as you talk about trying to figure out your goals and starting to budget that way. Can we go on to the next slide? And some surprising facts when we're talking about women in the workplace. I just wanted to bring some of the facts here that I have in the U.S. You talk about 41% of female workers live paycheck to paycheck compared to 30% else. Women tend to improve their financial literacy with age, while men, financial literacy tends to be flat or peak in their middle years and decline as they get older. So in my family, as an example, we talk about my dad said in his younger days, absolutely, his financial literacy was there, and it seems as he's gotten older, he's depended more and more on my mom to make sure that things were taken care of. I don't know what that's akin to when you talk about him getting older. I don't know. It's really in the study, but as you look at it, I have multiple instances where I do see that. So it's so important for the women that are on the line. We talk about increasing your financial literacy. The sky is the limit, and you're an underserved piece of the wealth building within the world. So most women receive 2 inheritances, one from their parents and then one from their spouse. So as you know, women tend to live longer than men. So if your family or your parents do have the means to be able to pass on wealth, you may have an instance where you're able to receive it there. And then if you and your partner are building and your spouse passes away, that's the second one. So 80% of first-time mothers return to the same employer, with 69% returning at the same pay, skill level, and hours per week. So another hindrance when it comes to women in the workforce is childbirth. And it can be very detrimental to your success when you're in the growth phase of your career. Anytime that you take away, leave space for somebody else to get their training that much more and come back and potentially take your spot or take the promotion that you were going for. So it's always hard as a woman when you have to deal with and try to work through being a mom and being a working professional. And sometimes there's a double standard when it comes to success, and when we talk about paying everything else, it's trying to make sure that we have equal pay for equal work, but we haven't gotten there yet. And I'm sure there are plenty of people even on this line that can speak to that. Now, 40% of single mother families put their savings towards their children's education versus retirement. And so you find, again, as kids are the most important things in your life, a lot of times, and as you do, as is typical as a parent, you put your children first, but it's to your detriment. And so as a woman is going to live longer, potentially, but as the statistics show that you'll have a longer, fuller life, it's also important to make sure that you put yourself in that equation, because you're going to be around for a while. So you want to make sure as you get older, there's a difference between saying, okay, I'm going to work until I'm 60, 65, 70, as opposed to being 85 saying, you know what, I think I'm going to get back to work. I've noticed that I didn't save as well as I'd wished, and I think I'm just going to get back out there and find a job. You'll find very quickly it's much more difficult to try to find a job in the latter years of your life. So it's important while you're in the growth and the wealth accumulation phase that you continue to push as hard as you can, because you ultimately want to be happy in your later years and you want to be comfortable. That's the biggest thing. Can we move to the next slide? So staying financially fit. You have the big three. You have assets and liabilities and knowing your worth. So as you start to accumulate assets and put that money to the side, it's, okay, what does your overall financial picture look like? And if your assets are a small piece and your liabilities, meaning the debt that you have, are twice, 3 times what your assets are, you have a mountain to climb. And it's just a matter of looking at, do I have good debt versus bad debt? The next thing is just assessing the goals. So know what you want and plan to get it. And again, that's being truly honest with yourself, being realistic, and just sticking to your plan. But if you need to make an adjustment, make the adjustment. And if you have financial difficulties, that could be an adjustment where hopefully you've planned for now that you started to put away some money for the short term, where it really could just be making sure that your essential expenses are taken care of. And then once you get back on your feet, it's adjusting to make sure that you don't give up on what you initially started, because time is against us in all instances. And it's important to create a routine and continue it, because it becomes a habit. And it's building those positive habits, especially around your finances, that will truly lead to that success. And just putting in there, just being responsible in your borrowing. So stay within your means. Sometimes you do want to get, especially here in the U.S., you see people that want to get a nice fancy car. Well, if it's not within your budget, it's okay to get a practical car and be able to save and continue to put towards your retirement. And guess what? If you do things right, you might be able to live that much better as you get older, as opposed to what I like to say is grinding now, so that once you get to a certain space, you're able to actually live a little better than you thought. So you set the goals and you might surprise yourself, but it's about sticking to it and making sure that you're not living above your means. If you make $1, you want to try to live on 50 cents. And it's really hard for people to understand that. But in budgeting and as you're saving, the key number that you want to, as a takeaway, in your gross income, if you're able to save 20% of your gross, not your net, if you're able to save 20% of your gross over a series of, let's call it 20 plus years, when it's time for you to retire, especially if you're in your 30s, 40s, even your 50s, it's a little harder when you're in your mid to late 40s. But if you have a track record, especially for the younger folks on the line, if you're able to save 20% and put it aside and you're able to get some interest on that, compound interest over the next 20 or 30 years, you'd be amazed at what you're able to achieve there. And that's really how you accumulate and generate wealth. And then I believe can you go to the next slide? That is it. So a big thank you to everyone on the line. And I hope that you got a few things to take away in regards to budgeting, find out and put everything on paper. Find out what it is that you're making. And you also want to put what you plan to make in the next year and the year after that. You want to have goals around earned income, but you want to see, okay, what are my expenses now? And if there's money left over, what am I doing with that extra money? As opposed to saying, oh, I have an extra $100 to go do whatever I want. No, it needs to be earmarked for something so that you can continue to generate the wealth and talk about putting money to the side to help you and further your benefit and your family.
Okay, great. Kevin, thank you so much. That was really, really helpful, very practical and important advice. I have a couple questions that have come in. The first one is, because a lot of our audience participants are international, what do you recommend for people in some countries who lack such robust financial infrastructure as we do here in the States? Like, what should they do and how should they be saving?
So the important part, and that is a challenge. So you may not get the return that you're looking for, and again, things are a lot different here. But it's when you talk about what you're able to bring in, we all have expenses regardless of where we are in the world. So it's finding out where those expenses are, and then what's the money that you have on top of that. And then looking at, if you don't have the financial infrastructure in place, what's something that can help you make sure that A, you're covered for any emergencies that arise. So you may not get the best interest, but if you're able to put, let's even just say arbitrarily $1,000 into an account where, I don't know if it's something where you don't have a bank to put it into, but even just a safe place to keep it, that's an instance where if something changes in your finances, you have access to that. Outside of the banking system, there are different things that you can invest in. I'd suggest staying away from investing in business ventures unless you really have a full plan in place. Beyond that, it's a little difficult to speak to, but you want to make sure that home is taken care of before you start to go out and invest in other entities. And another thing that I know holds value around the world is precious metals. So even here, sometimes you just, even for myself, I have a certain portion that I put towards something that's not necessarily around interest rates, but it's around actual value. So you're able to invest in, talk about gold bullion and some different things that way, where you look at outside of the stock market and interest rates, what's a valuable or something that has been around for a long time that you might be able to invest in. The biggest thing about it is safekeeping it. So if you don't have a place to store it, then it does become another liability for you to make sure if you're purchasing or if there's a way for you to get gold coins, That's another way where you can put towards something that typically you'll find has value outside of a standard lending institution or banking institution. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So another question that has come in is that a lot of what you're talking about is pretty consistent for people who have a regular paycheck, right? So sort of a more standard job. But the vast majority of our audience are actually entrepreneurs. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what to do around that when you're essentially creating a business and reinvesting all of the revenue of your business back into growing the business, and what that looks like in terms of how a person can build a nest egg for themselves for the future.
Absolutely. So as an entrepreneur, it's a very different bucket where essentially everything that you make, you're right, it goes back into your business. And so when we talk about wealth building and generation, as you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you're just starting out where you're building your business, that is essentially what's going to happen. You've set your budget where what are the essential things that you need to get by? And then it's trying to find those investors that believe in you just as much. With the entrepreneurial route, it's always great to have financial backing outside of yourself because obviously it lowers the risk that you take on with the business. In case you do have some bumps in the road, you have that backing in place. But also, if things do go sour and it's time for you to reassess the business and maybe you start a new business, you're not fully on the hook. It's always good where you want to try to spread the liability in regards to being an entrepreneur, where you have a team in place of that financial backing. Not always readily available, but when you're going out and as you're promoting your business, it's always good to, as you talk about, bringing people who believe in what you're promoting so that you have that line in case, that emergency line to go to in case you need to get through a tough patch. Because that's when businesses fail. It doesn't mean that your business isn't good. If you come into a tough patch, it's what do you have in place to get you through that season? And sometimes the season can last a lot longer than you anticipate. So it's really about how robust that plan is and how deep your resources are able to go. Because sometimes in that first year, you may not see the return, maybe at a deficit. And it's having those people in place that are able to believe in you and continue to help fuel it until you're able to get the purchase orders, the contracts, in order to truly execute your vision that you know is good. It's just a matter of getting to the right people so that they can see it and then starting to generate that consistent income. And I think the last piece to that with an entrepreneur is sometimes you will get one big contract and you know it's for a finite amount of time, but you'll have an excess with that order. And it's how are you taking that excess where you're investing it back in the business, but you're also looking at what if there's some time in between my next order or my next contract? How am I able to weather this storm so I'm still able to get out and get in front of people to show them the value of what I believe in so that they can.
Okay, that's a really great answer. Thank you so much. One final, just very practical tip that one of our participants asked for is, what do you recommend for a small business for like software or something like that in terms of tracking expenses and tracking financials? What do you think is best for a small business and entrepreneur?
Good question. So thinking about it, there's some different budgeting software where there's I think it's something called Cash Pro, and there's a few things. I may have to follow up with that just to go around. There's some budgeting software that's good, and I'm thinking right off the top of the head, I don't have that readily available, but I'd be happy to follow up with that. And then some other things where it's able to track if you do have employees and folks that you need to pay. It keeps track of some of those different things too. But you want to start with some essential just budgeting software where you're able to type in, here's what my gross was for the month, and then start to separate out what the different expenses are.
Okay, great. And just super quickly, one last question, if you could answer this one fast. What advice do you have for young entrepreneurs in terms of separating finances, business versus personal?
It's so difficult, especially just entrepreneurs as a whole. But again, we talk about sticking to your budget, sticking to your plan. It's so important that you separate the two. And at some point, you're going to need to give yourself some money, and it's finding out a way to track what you need to take out to pay for your personal expenses beyond what goes into the business. So again, you do have to eat. While you're at work, that's a business expense. However, outside of work or while you're at home, even if you are working, there's different ways that you have to really separate the two. And what happens, that's the way that you're able to track your success. So you want to have a tangible way to track success and find out how much, A, you had to pay yourself in order to just survive. And in the first 3 to 5 years, it really might be just that, you're surviving. And you want to track, okay, last year I paid myself X amount of money. Okay, now this following year, this is what I look to be able to take out of the business. And that's another driver in showing what's the progress that you made or the adjustments that you need to make in regards to living. Sometimes you might need to downsize. And as business goes and if you find success, you might be able to increase some of the personal expenses that you have there. But it's really important to have two separate buckets. And it does get commingled to a certain extent, but the better you're able to do that, the better you're really able to see your progress as an entrepreneur to show what you've been able to do over a period of time.
Okay, Kevin, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was really helpful for everyone.